Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to stand up because I hate sitting down and talking. So the first thing I want to say is that you should know there's a new definition of insanity, which is to come after Vaclav, right? And I got thanks to Francis, I get that spot. I've been asked to talk about three questions: state of the art of energy sources, future view, how the mix will change, and then also a little bit on the nuclear power. So I'll try to do that all in about 6-7 minutes. I read just recently that George Marshall presented the Marshall Plan in 11 minutes, so I think I can try to be, that could be the role model. So I think the thing I want to start with is the importance of narratives. And we heard a powerful narrative from Vaclav Smil. I think narratives are everything in my view. And if you're interested, Robert Shiller, who is a well-known economist at Yale, wrote a wonderful book on economic narratives. And the narrative today in the world of energy is quite concerning. You touched on it yesterday, Francis. So the narrative is it's about energy security versus energy transition. So some people are arguing that it's all about energy security, high prices, people can't afford energy today, and it's all because the world wanted to go very fast on energy transition, which led to underinvestment particularly in oil and gas. There is the other side, which says, well, we are going too slow. I mean, Vaclav kind of implied 50 years, which have started 50 years back. And because we are going too slow, we can see all the impact of climate change. We're already seeing that now with heat and floods and hurricanes. I mean, we can make, and there is attribution science has become much better now, in my view, which tells you that there is the impact. I think, in my view, this narrative, this kind of versus narrative, is very disingenuous. It's really that we need both. We can't transition the world's energy system without energy security. At the very end, we heard that there are billions of people who have no access to energy. They need access to energy, clean and affordable. Cleaner, the better. So that's one important narrative we need to remember going forward. That's kind of my first pillar of the narrative. The second pillar of the narrative is it's really about emissions. I think the phrase energy transition, in my view, and I've been working on it for a long time, not much to show for it, unfortunately, should be emissions transition. Emissions really matter. And the problem we have is that emissions are not going down. You can go to the NOAA website every month, every day, and look at where the emissions are. They are not going down. And one thing we should remember about emissions is the so-called bathtub effect, right? If you have a water in a bathtub and close the tap, close the drain, the water, and close the tap, the water is not going to go down unless you open the drain. That's about the same thing as carbon dioxide and GHG. We can stop emitting completely tomorrow. The concentrations are going to take a long time to go down. And that's one of the reasons we are going to need some carbon removal and negative emissions technology. So the narrative needs to shift from, as Vaclav is the real master of energy transition, the world has been transitioning every day. We're not going to wake up one morning and say, oh, wow, now we're in a different world of energy. But we need to think about emissions, which is what is going to really, really matter. The third pillar of this narrative has to be about scale, and gigatons matter, not millions of tons. Gigatons matter. We are emitting over 40 gigatons of CO2. Vaclav was using 10, which is carbon, but CO2 you have to multiply. So just to I can give you some data. Coal emissions are about 14.7 gigatons. 14.7 gigatons coming from coal. Oil is about 11.5. Gas is about 7.7. Then, of course, these all go into other things like cement, which is 1.7 gigaton. So you want to solve a gigaton scale problem, think about a gigaton scale solution, and I'll come back to a solution for coal in particular, because coal is one thing we know how to solve. I mean, that's one thing we need to really focus on. The last pillar of this narrative has to be about pace. Energy, everybody wants this emission transition to be a revolution, actually a fast revolution. The sad reality is that at best, it will be a fast evolution. It's not going to be it's not going to be a revolution. We know that. We know that there is all the billions of dollars of infrastructure in place. in spite of all our goodwill and hard work, it's not going to be a revolution. One thing I want to highlight, which was referred by Vaclav, is the difference between, we always talk about solar as how wonderful solar is. I used to work in solar business. I know a little bit about it. Solar industry is like semiconductors. You can do a lot of fast tracking in semiconductors. And this is what Vaclav calls Moore's curse. Everybody knows Moore's law, the doubling of semiconductor density and the cost. That's about 35% improvement per year. 35% improvement. Electronics, power, solid state physics. Most of the stuff we do in energy is process, chemical engineering. Those things don't improve at 35%. I will just share with you a couple of numbers quickly. Steam turbine efficiency, something we use every day, 1.5% in the last 100 years per year, 1.5%. Energy intensity for steel declined by 1.7% per year in the last from 1950, so last 70 years. Energy intensity of ammonia, we have already talked a lot about ammonia, from 1913 to 2020, 100 years, about 3% per year. So think about energy as a as a chemical process, physical process, not as a power electronics. And what I tell people is that we are in a hardware business, not in a software business. And in the hardware business, version change is years, not minutes. You can't update your version in a few minutes like you do in your iPhone. So now that I, along with the Vaclav, depressed you very much, let me tell you about a few bright spots. Of course, the first is coal. So in COP, one of the best things which happened in Glasgow was not all the Article 6 stuff you read about, but the grand bargain with South Africa, $8.3 billion to remove coal. So how about the grand bargain with India, with Indonesia, with China? It's, when we're throwing around 1.5 trillion in the US to do infrastructure, a few billion will help, and they will have a real impact on the 14.7 gigatons of coal we can emit. So coal is something we can solve. And in terms of the sectors which matter a lot, and the electricity sector is one thing we know how to solve. We can't electrify everything. I think you kind of got a good explanation. You can go quite far. And we can get clean electricity. We need clean, firm electricity, and that's why we need, there are only three sources, by the way, of clean, firm electricity: nuclear, hydro, and geothermal. Really, nuclear and hydro are the ones at scale. So I'll come very quickly to nuclear in a minute. So one thing we need to do is deal with coal. Second thing we need to do is spend a lot more money in non-OECD, in the emerging economies, than in OECD. Right now, there's too much money chasing too few projects in the US and EU. There is very little money going into emerging economies. Last year, everybody focused on the net zero report from IEA, but actually IEA did a much better report on financing. And in that report, it said the cost of borrowing in Nigeria or India or other countries is at times 6 to 7 times that in OECD. Let's get that cost down. Let's make the 100 billion commitment a floor, not a ceiling. We're nowhere near that 100 billion commitment which was made by the developing world. So there are a lot of things one can do to really fast track. Another one for the oil industry is dealing with methane emission. About 16% of warming is coming from methane emissions. That's something we can deal with. A lot of technologies, I won't bore you through all of that, but CCS, hydrogen, they all have to be scaled. I mean, right now we are currently storing 40 million tons from CCS. Think about gigaton versus a million ton, several order of magnitude different. Very briefly, nuclear energy. So bad news in nuclear, everything we're building today is cost overrun. The US, 2 reactors, $28 billion. France, 1, $21 billion. UK, 2, $30 billion. But on the other hand, in the UAE, they just started their second reactor over a gigawatt on time, on budget. China is going to build 150 new reactors over the next 10 years. So China is on a path to this nuclear. The real exciting thing in the nuclear is, I'm sure you all know, small modular reactor, which is the technology even Bill Gates has put his money on. And I think we're going to see a lot of improvement in that. And finally, in fission, we had a first positive energy fission reaction last year by a company in my wonderful city of Cambridge, Commonwealth Fusion, and they got $1.8 billion in the seed round. So all of those entrepreneurs in this room, that's your target, $1.8 billion seed round. But there is big hope in fusion. So with that, I'll stop.